Hello and welcome to another bite-sized episode of the Science on the Edge podcast series. I'm Dr. Mark Darcy, and in today's episode I'm going to be talking about pernicious anemia. That's pernicious anemia. Easily confused with other types of anemia. You're probably aware that anemia can cause a reduction in red blood cell count, and it can be caused by not getting enough iron in your diet or not getting enough vitamin B12 in your diet. That's true, but it's more complicated than that. Anemia isn't always caused by a deficiency in dietary intake of iron or B12, and it doesn't always, the deficiencies don't always result in a lower red blood cell count. Sometimes you get abnormal shaped red blood cells, so it can be the wrong size, it can be the wrong shape, but you might have the right number. You might have a decent number of those cells, but they are malformed, and you may even have the correct amount of dietary intake of B12 or iron. But the thing is, we all process these things very differently. Some people can absorb and can process iron and B12 very well. But let's stick with B12 for now. When it comes to B12, there are a number of genetic variants. So these are known as alleles. We all carry certain genes for processing certain vitamins, minerals, fats, etc. But we may have different alleles of these genes, meaning different variants of them. Some people, for example, will carry variants of B12, of the genes that process B12 that mean they have difficulty absorbing or processing that particular vitamin, which can lead to either full-blown anemia with a lower than normal red blood cell count, or misformed red blood cells, or maybe even neither of those, but other symptoms relating to B12 deficiency. What are the symptoms, by the way, do you think, of B12 deficiency? Well, you're probably thinking the obvious ones right now. You get headaches, you maybe feel fatigued. And yes, that's a classic symptoms. Feeling fatigued is probably the most understood symptom. A lot of people with B12 deficiencies or with problems absorbing B12 can end up feeling very, very fatigued, and sleep doesn't seem to fix that issue. But there can be other issues as well with a reduction in B12 absorption or even dietary B12 reduction. These other symptoms can include such things as problems with the heart, arrhythmias. Basically, the nerves in our body have a coating on them made of something called myelin, and we need B12 to make that coating. So if we lack vitamin B12 in our diet, we end up with nerves that don't fire so well. And that can result in heart arrhythmias, can result in tingling of the fingers and the toes, so the arms and the legs even, sort of tingling feeling, loss of sensation. You can develop ulcers in your mouth as a result of B12 deficiency too, slightly different cause in that case, but yes, B12 deficiency can result in ulcers in the mouth. You can end up with neurological conditions if the deficiency is left untreated for a long period of time. So cognitive impairment, even dementia, can result from prolonged deficiency in B12. Okay, so now giving you a general overview of anemia, either caused by just having certain gene variants that mean you don't absorb things like B12 or iron. Let's stick with B12 very well. Or perhaps it's just dietary, you don't have enough in your diet. But pernicious anemia is a little bit different. It's called pernicious anemia because in the past, it could be fatal when we didn't know how to treat it. Luckily, we can treat it quite well at the moment. So what is pernicious anemia? Well, it affects about 1 in 1,000 people, but actually up to 1 in 50 or so of over 60s. But still quite rare, still quite a rare condition. And it's an autoimmune condition. So to absorb vitamin B12, you need a particular enzyme in your digestive system known as intrinsic factor, IF, intrinsic factor. So you produce intrinsic factor, and the intrinsic factor binds with any B12 in your food, and the complex of intrinsic factor and B12 is absorbed into your body. Without intrinsic factor, it's very difficult to absorb B12 or to get enough B12 in your body. Now, if you have pernicious anemia, what happens is, for some reason, and we're not totally sure why, your own immune system doesn't like intrinsic factor. And basically, you start making antibodies against your own intrinsic factor or against the cells that make the intrinsic factor. These antibodies that your immune system make destroy the intrinsic factor and therefore reduce your ability to absorb B12. So what's the treatment for pernicious anemia? Well, the treatment for pernicious anemia is basically to get the B12 levels in your blood back to normal. Sometimes that is achieved by taking quite large oral supplements of B12, very large amounts of the supplement to try and compensate. But it may be that you need injections, and injections are a common treatment for people with pernicious anemia. So every few months or so, you would have a big injection of B12 to top up your levels, and most of the symptoms of the pernicious anemia should dissipate. And there are more symptoms with pernicious anemia than even in normal anemia. For example, because there is this problem in your stomach with your antibodies attacking the intrinsic factor, you get things like gastritis and acid reflux, and you feel quite sick to the stomach. You can get all sorts of other problems, so weakness, tiredness, gastritis, and even cognitive impairment. But it's very treatable. It's very treatable with injections. It's no longer pernicious, let's just say. It's not always diagnosed as quickly as it should be. Because it is a relatively rare condition, it's missed by a lot of doctors. And a lot of doctors might treat the condition believing it to be something like burnout or just overwork or something like that. And that's why you feel tired. And you might be advised just to get more rest or to work a little bit less. But it can be detected relatively easily with the correct blood test. So if you have any of those symptoms, or if you have all of those symptoms and they've been ongoing for some time and you've not been tested for pernicious anemia, it might be worth getting tested for it. Okay, so that's my overview of anemia, specifically pernicious anemia. And I will speak to you all again very soon when I will be talking about obesity and the truth about fat. That will be my next bite-sized episode. That's all for now. Thank you for listening, guys, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. Goodbye.